Just start. Hey,
You
this
have
is
the
Scott
floor.
Park Phillips, and I'm doing an interview with Mahipal. How do you say your last name, Mahipal?
Lunia.
Nunya. Great. Uh, I'm going to do a brief introduction, then I expect you to take over the introduction in any way you want. Uh, I'm hoping that people already know who I am, but uh, I've written 2 books. This is my business card. Okay. Mahipal has started something called Immersion Labs, which is a place to study martial arts in 3 trajectories. One is uh, deeply intensive. The other is journeys out into the world, haplogy or discovery of things that most people haven't had contact with, or that are dying or are isolated, something like that. And the other one is short workshops, and he's documenting everything with video and getting people to write articles. I wrote one, in fact, on stick fighting and the male genital organ. And I think that uh, I think he's really interesting, and I want to get at some of that, and we're just going to talk. So why don't you say something about yourself?
I think you covered it. Nothing really interesting on my end. I've been doing martial arts for quite a while. Main focus had been in martial arts and in Japanese before coming to the US and falling in love with Americana, if you will, and then of course a whole bunch of Southeast Asian arts. Most arts that people have no idea what it is, but that's what makes it interesting for me. So um, I just see myself as somebody who's an explorer, looking out to learn, learn about these fighting arts, and in the process, learn about our own humanity, if you will. So that's what this journey is, and I think. Just like you and everybody else, just another inhabitant of Spaceship Earth. That's about it.
Well, let me dig in there for a second, because I want to get
Sure,
into you, but let's deal with the idea first.
sure.
We have we we have so in the world of anthropology, let's say, let me just do a quick review of the 20th century of like the study of culture, right? And I frame martial arts and dance really in the same category, which gets lots of people to be bothered by me, but I'm right. So let's move on. um the you have this, oh look, that other culture, it's really weird, it's really different. uh can we understand it? And what happens there is we end up framing it by what we think the world is. So you get a completely filtered reality, which is uh, which which is which badly represents what the thing is. And then you get the wild and amazing Claude Levi-Strauss, who flees Marxism and fascism in Europe at the end of World War II. He'd been a Marxist, and he's like, this makes no sense. These people are all irrational. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. And he goes with his wife, who happens to be an anthropologist, to Brazil, and he goes, whoa, this is such a cool subject. I can ask the question, why are people rational or not? Are they or not? Like, what's going on there? And then he goes back to the New York City Library and just reads everything anybody has ever written about another culture that he can find. And he tries to construct a systems for understanding what human culture is. And then jump ahead, there's a lot of interesting people around there and in between, and you get Clifford Geertz, and he steps in and he says, in the late 60s, I guess, and he says, man, I think the best, he's kind of a hippie, man, the best I think we can do is to get like what people say it is that they're doing. Like we ask them a bunch of questions and watch what they're doing and sort of record it in our own voice, and then just ask them what it is they're doing. And he calls that thick description. Like, it's a report of what the people themselves say they're doing. And then James Clifford comes along and with what has been called post-colonial studies, and just, but it really shouldn't be called that. He just busts it up, and he's like, the problem, we're back to the problem of square one, which is that when you're from one culture looking at another culture, you're making choices about what to engage with. And this creates the problem that you're like, this is like, people are looking, say, I've been doing Ghanaian dance, right? You're looking at what is authentic Ghanaian dance, right? But it turns out that the same people who are making and doing these dances are doing comedy routine dances of British soldiers, right? Which is a similar dance that you see in the Americas, where they're doing the cakewalk, right? And in fact, these are martial dances, but they're comic martial dances, right? And this kind of culture gets completely ignored by the anthropologists because it's sort of embarrassing, right? And so what James Clifford said is that the moment we acknowledge all that going on, we've decentered everything. There is no longer a center for what is true. It's different than relativism. It's components, the decentering of things. And so I'm sorry for the long question here, but I'm getting there. So the problem, the initial problem was Protestantism, or to some extent Catholicism, as a kind of worldview that like pulls in the Enlightenment, but is essentially projecting itself onto other cultures and interpreting them. And it's a universalism. And you have the same thing with Marxists, particularly Marxist anthropologists, doing exactly the same thing, but framing everything as oppressor, oppressed, or whatever their frames are, that we should just toss in the trash because it's not meaningful. It's a useful tool, but it's not meaningful as an overview. And then, and I think when you take this decentering view and you're looking for universalisms, you find one in Hinduism, which is attempting to seemingly will incorporate its enemies, even like things that have broken off from it, reincorporate them, and also absorbative, extremely absorbative. I don't even know if we should call, when we call something a religion, it's awkward because it's not a single thing here. But and you see the same thing in China, not the same thing, but
similar.
Here's the difference, and I think, and this is what I want to get at, and just let you go once I've dropped this bomb. So China is a religious state. So it's the state which imposes a kind of universalism, which is the regulation of ritual, fundamentally. And that's different than the Hindu tradition of incorporation. They're similar, but different types of universalisms. So you happen to be Jain, and I think the first Jain I've ever met. And I don't know much about Jainism, but one thing that I was told was that they're not only super vegetarian, but don't kill. So just take it away. That's a lot. The biggest question you've ever gotten.
I know. I don't know where to start. So where do you want me to start? With the Jainism piece?
Yeah, and then just work your way back.
All right. So Jainism, I think it's a misunderstanding in many ways. So let's look at, I don't even like the term Jainism because there's no such thing, right? You are either a Jaina, that is somebody on the path of, on this path of conquest of oneself. That's what it is. And when we talk about conquest of oneself, you have to understand the Indian notion of karma, of basically cause and effect. So when you're on the Jaina path, you are out to conquer karma because you want liberation or nirvana. So there is.
Wait, you want liberation? You're conquering karma because you want liberation from what?
Yeah, also called nirvana, right?
Nibbana. Okay.
You want to, yeah, you want nirvana. You want freedom from the cycle of birth and rebirth. So now, when people say don't kill, that's a very shallow understanding of Jainism, right? I can see the question behind it as to where does martial arts come in if you're truly a Jain. What Jainism it talks about is ahimsa. Ahimsa is one of its core tenets. What ahimsa means, is the negation, and himsa is violence. So non-violence, right? Now, in order for you to be non-violent, you have to be able to be extremely violent and choose not to do it. That's number one. Now, number two, there's no notion of God per se within Jainism. Essentially, what is considered God is your Atman and the liberation of your Atman for yourself. So what you have is 24 Tirthankaras. Tirthankaras are gurus, if you will, or those who walked the path before us and laid out the map, the pedagogy, if you will, towards this liberation.
Could you say that word? Tankara?
Tirthankara.
Tirthankara. Uh-huh.
Yeah, Tirthankara, right? So now the interesting thing about these Tirthankaras, or these teachers of the path, if you will, all 24 of them, we have 24, all 24 of them came from Kshatriya families. Kshatriya meaning warrior families, right? And many of them were of royal pedigree, were kings, right? 4 of them also had the title of Chakravati. That means the king of kings, right?
The center of kings, yeah?
Yes. So you rule over a bunch of different kings. So it was a federated state where other kings would pay liege or royalty into these kingdoms, right? Now,
yes.
The only way you become a Chakravati is you going to war.
Yes.
Right? So the fact that also Rishabdev, who's considered the first Tirthankara, used to teach Shastra Vidya or martial arts. The 22nd Tirthankara is considered to be the first cousin of Krishna, the mythical Krishna, and he went to war. The 23rd Tirthankara also went to war to protect the Nagas. So, and we are talking about the
pause
7th
there.
century BC.
Nagas are
Naga Kingdom.
Okay.
There's a dynasty, not Nagas as in snakes. Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, so the idea that when you think about ahimsa, it is not non-violence as it's normally understood, which people usually use that term to say pacifist. But that's not the Jaina way. The Jaina way is extreme responsibility, right? So you have the ability to be extremely violent and choose to do otherwise. Now, let me give you another example. There was a Jain monk called Kala Chakra, who is a very famous Indian Jain monk. And what happened is one of these kings, I forget his name, he kidnapped one of his female devotees. So what did he do? He pulled his sword out and he went to war. So this was a Jain monk, right, who went to war. So when you think about non-violence, it is about being non-violent to the greatest whole. It is about you reducing the karmic load that you have in the best possible way. Now, sometimes you have to do shitty stuff. Now, that's kind of the burden of command, because if you are the captain of your ship, if you will, there is a burden of that command. And when you have a burden of that command, and you may do things that are not exactly kosher, if you will, but then it is also your responsibility to then go into penance and clean those acts up. So when we think about ahimsa, you have to understand the language and understand not violent. But only a person who's capable of extreme violence can claim to have transcended it and choose to be not violent.
Okay. I'm going to ask another question, hoping to wind you back to the bigger question. That was great, by the way. I don't know if have you read Wendy Doniger's book? The Hindus. It's banned in India right now, I believe.
I grew
Why
up in
would
a
you?
culture. Why would I read it?
Why would I? Anyway, she does go into that in some, just for people who are outside of the culture who might be interested in and just rehearing it from someone else's point of view. And so I'm gonna tie it in a little bit to the conversation that I think she raises there. That also, to me, is a very important question about what a martial artist is in the larger historic context, which is a relationship to sacrifice. And if I could do a little, we'll just call it mythic proto-history, there's a period of time when human sacrifice is really common, and it's related to warfare. You capture some of your enemies, uh, and then you sacrifice them, because what else are you going to do with them other than enslave them? And that's a problem if you have too many slaves, and who knows what their justifications are. I can't read the minds of people in the past, but sacrifice was a big thing. Sacrifice is also a way of reifying someone's authority. So if you're not listening to me, I take one of you and I kill them in front of you, and I just open the guts so you can see them, like, this is what's going to happen. You don't forget. um, which becomes ritualized, like on a grand scale, especially by conquering peoples of other peoples. I'm now going to publicly sacrifice you, and this then becomes it begins to have a strong relationship with the nature. So forces of nature, whether they be animal spirits or uh, weather or earthquakes or meteors and floods, all those things. And so, for instance, in China, the sacrifice of a person, um, usually a young girl, to the river so that it won't flood, became an iconic conversation in the early writing tradition. And uh, and of course, Abraham sacrificing his son, or
or
not sacrificing
or
his
the
son.
Greeks sacrificing their virgin daughters to Poseidon to calm Poseidon down.
Right.
You find that in Odysseus.
Exactly. And actually it seems worldwide. And then
Yeah.
there's a change, right? So in Judaism and Christianity, in about the 2nd century, Christianity comes into existence with the idea of belief, um, as a kind of foundational structure. At the end of sacrifice, we're going to stop doing sacrifice. We're still going to follow this book, which describes sacrifice, but uh, we're not going to do the sacrifice. We're going to make it mythic in a belief realm. And the Jewish tradition, which begins the current Jewish tradition, begins in the 2nd century with the end of sacrifice. And it becomes sacrifice, but it's based not on belief but on ritual, right? And the Greek tradition ends, actually. They end sacrifice and then they disappear. Basically, that tradition. Uh, in China, Daoism comes along, and uh, and Zhang Daoling shows up and says, and makes 2 rules. You could say "thou shalt" if you want to make it sound biblical, but the first 2 rules. The first one is, uh, do not get in the way of the people's relationship to heaven. Do not. It's this wuwei. It's non-aggression, right? It's a statement. Don't get in the way of people's direct communication with heaven. Okay. And number 2, don't sacrifice blood animals. Don't don't uh, don't do that. And so Taoism doesn't control the state, so it sets itself up as a kind of intermediary, negotiating with all the local cults, and does get spread throughout the country, and does take on a role for the government. But it's you could say its central function is to regulate sacrifice, right? And there's a Hindu equivalent that I don't understand very well, but maybe I could get you to talk about it.
What specifically? I mean, that's a big topic. Sacrifice is such a huge topic.
Well, can you just draw a general outline? Because the same thing seems to have happened in India, and I suspect it may have happened in India first, and then spread to those other places.
Maybe. I don't know about the historical accuracy of this.
Yeah, sure.
Um, but I would say sacrifice still happens, but in a mythic sense, right? So, for example, anytime you're doing a puja in India, right? You break a
Worship,
coconut. Yeah,
worship, a ritual worship. Yeah.
a ritualized worship. You break a coconut. The coconut signifies a human skull, right? So when you're smashing open the coconut, you're basically smashing open the human skull, smashing open the ego, right? When you have a havan kund, when you have a havan, which is the fire, the sacred fires that, and within some tantric traditions and Jain traditions, you bring that fire into you, so you become the havan kund. So you have the fire running, and you are essentially that which burns, right? So the idea of sacrifice, I think, evolved, where there's a lot of human sacrifice, animal sacrifice. In fact, animal sacrifice still goes on in India in certain parts, right? But again, I'm not the best expert on all things India. It's a vast place, and varying cultures. But one big shift that happened is that the sacrifice became, in many ways, internal. For example, even within certain wedding traditions, right?
Which
People see
traditions?
that marriage
Wedding.
traditions,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Certain people see it as, okay, this is joyous joining of two. But in certain traditions and in certain Jain traditions, such as mine, it is also celebrated as a death ceremony, because it is the death of an individual and the birth of this new unit. So it is a sacrifice. It is a mythic sacrifice. Now, the key part about these mythic sacrifices is essentially a transformation from one state to the next. Uh, but the most important part is, how am I partaking in this sacrifice? If I'm not truly partaking in a very sensuous way, where I'm completely in it, and it's nothing but an empty ritual. Just like any, you go into your martial arts and you do a kata, you don't understand, the bunkai or the meaning behind it. It looks pretty. You think you've done martial arts, all you've done is a little bit of exercise, right? Similarly, if you are partaking in these rituals, but you are not invested in it, where you are also the sacrifice, because he who goes into the ritual is not the one who returns from the ritual.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you understand that, then you are being sacrificed, because that which was you went into something to have an initiation, a shock to the system, a shock to the ego and the psyche structure, which breaks and something else emerges. So if you look at sacrifice and sacrifice culture, it's always been seen as the death of one for the emergence of the next. So, especially within the higher Indian traditions, if you will. I hate low and high, but I don't have other language to talk about it. The more evolved parts, rituals became personalized, and you became the sacrificial lamb.
Can you put a date on that transition?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Because this is a very old Jain tradition as well. So even if you look at the people that can be historically verified, such as
Can
the
you
23rd
repeat
and the
that?
24th.
We just had an internet interruption. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, I said even if you look at just the last two Tirthankaras or gurus who can be historically verified, the 23rd and the 24th Tirthankaras, that is 7th and 5th century BC. So at least that old.
Yeah, I asked this question because that's a huge conversation in Daoism as well. You have for instance, it's the internalization of external rituals.
Yes, it's
called
alchemy.
Shangqing. Right. Well, the alchemy is much earlier, right? And then but what we really end up talking about when we're talking about history here is codification, because somebody was probably doing the entire thing internally and externally earlier. It's just not clear from a historical point of view. How do you know? But that same period, it's happening in China, right? The Shangjing is 5th to 7th century. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that they were talking to each other. In the 7th century, there were about 2,000 Chinese monks recording Buddhist and
I was talking
Pali.
about 7th century BC.
Oh, you were BC. Oh, okay. So you're there 1,000 years earlier, easily.
Yeah.
So that's great. I mean, that actually gives, if that's really the case, at least in literary terms, that gives us the origin in India. And I think people are
Well,
reluctant,
also
especially Chinese are reluctant.
If you also look at tantric rituals, okay,
Yeah.
which are considered Puranic,
Yes.
meaning pre-Veda, right? Now, if you're looking at pre-Veda, you're already a couple thousand years BC.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of those, texts and how Tantra evolved, and even if you study a text like Vigyanbhat of Tantra, you're going to see that many of these were ritualized forms which were taken completely internal. So
okay, so you burn yourself up, you visualize, you not just visualize, you enact in ritual the burning of yourself to emptiness. Do you have this concept? Because that would be the Taoist first step of the golden elixir or alchemy.
yeah, so India has two parts, right? And again, this is gross simplification for a conversation, right?
Yes.
One is the path of negation, neti neti neti, which means that I burn everything away. I say nothing is real. So that's one path, right? And the other path is it embraces everything and says everything is real. So no matter which path you take, you end up in the same place.
So in the real one, then you're are you visualizing or enacting or becoming a god?
That's the goal,
Okay.
right? It's a long process, right? So you first become a rishi, a maharishi, a siddha, a arihant, and after an arihant, you have the possibility of becoming a tirthankar or a god. I dislike that idea because, especially in the West, that is so bastardized, where you say, "Oh, all I have to do is remember I'm the Buddha and I'm the Buddha." No, you're fucking not. You know.
Wait, I lost that. You
So
surrender to the Buddha and what?
no, I keep hearing this where people say, "Oh yeah, I just have to realize, I just have to remember that I'm the Buddha, and then I'm the Buddha." And I'm like, "No, you're fucking not. You have to do the work over a few generations." So that really bugs me. That's why I don't like that idea. I don't like that idea at all. So for example, my other pet peeve is a word namaste, right? Where everyone says, "Oh yeah, namaste means the divinity in me bows to the divinity in you." That's not what it means. That's not at all what it means. Na is not. Ma comes from manas, which means mind, and te, which means no mind here. So the state of no mind in martial arts, it would be called mujin. So when you're saying namaste, it essentially means I have no mind, and I'm approaching you for equanimity, which is
Wait. Say that
completely
again.
different.
Slow down for the mic. When you say namaste or namaskar, what does it mean? Ah,
Na is not, it's the negation. Manas is mind. Stay is here. So namaste means no mind here, right? So the mind is absent and pure being, pure presence is present, right? Which is very different than saying, "Oh, the divinity in me is bowing to the divinity in you." So, so, so words get lost when you don't understand the meaning of it, and then it shoots you off in a completely different direction in terms of your growth, in terms of your evolution. So
we could we could travel down that path, but I think that we have a lot of other interesting paths to go down. Uh,
Sure.
uh, um, oh, I wanted to just say something about the golden elixir practice,
Hmm.
which is that the emptiness being, you could think of it as the base or the ground. So, so it's both the beginning and the end is how it's framed,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, and then you visualize the deity, you become the deity, but and then actually, in fact, if you're doing ritual, you store the deity in
Yes.
inside of infinite emptiness. And
Yes.
so in the Taoist version of it, you have married pairs of 9 married pairs or 18 deities with, in some cases, with their entire entourages and armies and whatever, all visualized inside. But it's not really inside the body; it's inside of emptiness inside of the body,
Yes.
right? And they all get brought out for ritual, so that they're
Yes.
being visualized as this massive thing, which is going to tie us to theater. So we're getting there. But this particular practice is the deities themselves. Every aspect that's visualized, say you visualize a scarf or the skin or the hair or the clothing, are all infinite. No
Hmm.
element is static, and no element uh, is is in a stable reality in that sense. It's always infinite. It's infinite, infinite, infinite. And so, um, one type of fruition that closely relates of this practice that closely ties into martial arts and dance and theater is this idea that there's a and I'm going to jump into some science language here for a second because it pulls more people in. Um, that you have a physical body and you have your perception of space,
Hmm.
and both neurology and kinesiology for the last 20 years have been saying that those two things always work together. We can't study them separately. They're always interacting.
Symbiotic. Yes.
Yeah, or cyclical or interactive, is that this causes that causes this. And what a fruition of the golden elixir, which filtered into Chinese cosmology, is that this one out here is called shun, which is the same word as God, right, or spirit, but it also means space, and the physical body, jing, which means that which can be reproduced.
Hmm.
And then there's this other thing called qi, which is a buffer, and the
Hmm.
buffer is like when you have stillness, the buffer automatically, when you have inner stillness, when you're quiet, the buffer automatically appears. And so to be a
Hmm.
martial artist is to be able to have the buffer there all the time. Like
Hmm.
that is, you maintain inner stillness or the fruition of inner stillness even when you're moving. And so you're
Hmm.
moved by the space itself. And
Hmm.
great actors are doing dancers are doing the same thing. And there are different ways into this kind of practice,
Hmm.
but it all intersects. So
Yes. Where do you want me to take that?
yeah, just roll, man.
So I think you're going to find a lot of the corollaries in India as well, where you almost have this idea of a cosmic anatomy. And I'm not going to get too much into it. This is considered really esoteric, but think about it. When they talk about Meru and when they talk about the Kailash and the mountains and the Parvata, they're really talking about your spine. And each organ has a god or a deity, a force attached to it, right? Now, going back as old as the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Vedas, there's this shloka in it which says, Richo akshare paramyo vyoman yasmin deva adivase nishayadu yastana veda kimricha karishayati ya ityadasta ime samasate. It talks about the collapse of fullness to the point from which everything emerges. He whose awareness is not on that point, what can the Vedas do for him? And
Mm.
he who resides in it, what can the Vedas do for him? right? So it's pretty similar to this idea that you were talking about. Now, if you bring this more down to earth, if you will, in the realm of martial arts, within certain aspects of Shastra Vidya, which is the old Indian fighting arts, and by the way, you also find this kind of uh, uh, um, way of being, if you will, within certain African cultures and within the Japanese Ainu fighting cultures as well, where I call them pathways out of yourself, right? And what I mean by pathways out of yourself is that it's out of your ego, where your small I goes absent, right? And when that small I goes absent, you open up to the space around you for those forces to act with you and through you, right? So that is really enacted. Now, it may sound really weird, but think about it. Any fighting culture, you would see armies enacting certain rituals and a holy madness descending on them, because you have to be a little bit crazy to pick up your sword and run all out
Right.
in front of an
We,
opposing army.
we call this holy madness possession in the literature of anthropology, right?
Yeah, I hate that word. I'm not going to use that word because I think it does it more disservice than allows one to investigate what it is. So you have access to these forces, and they seem to act through you. So uh, across cultures, some of these rituals are very, very similar. For example, I think you and I, I think while we're in LA, I still have
Hey, you're
moving
breaking up
counterclockwise
again.
in circles.
Just rewind for a second. Just say it again because it didn't come through.
We chatted about this while we were at the martial arts studies conference in LA,
Right.
right? And then in terms of sacrificing, it's usually when tying back to our previous conversation, where you're offering blood to the gods, right? To the gods per se, because now this is what is being sacrificed is ritually you. So you're already dead. So that has already been offered, and now a dead man walking, going into war. And I think that state is important if you are to come out alive in some ways. And number two, also so that you don't carry as much of that load back with you. And what I mean by that is when you come back alive, you have to reintegrate with society. And if you're carrying that load as though I did it, that leads you to PTSD,
Among other things.
among other things, right?
Bad
Uh,
behavior.
uh, yeah, really, really bad behavior, right? So this notion of being impersonal, and the Bhagavad Gita, for example, talks about it. Hey, do your bidding. The fate has already been
Can I
decided.
just stop you for a second because I think this may come up later in the conversation? The Bhagavad Gita is a small section of the Mahabharata, which is a massive epic and ancient epic of India, the Indian region. And it is a conversation between Arjuna, the hero of the story, who's going into battle against his brothers, I believe, and Krishna, the charioteer, the god of dance, as it were, one of the two gods of dance, is actually driving the chariot, and they're having a conversation. And the eminent scholar, uh, what's his name, Victor Marr, China scholar, actually in his translation of the Tao Te Ching says very closely related to the Bhagavad Gita. But nobody has followed his scholarship there. It's just floating out there untouched because of politics, I think. But anyway, that's the Bhagavad Gita. Anyway, keep going. Sorry for the interruption. I think
No,
people
that's
should
all
know
right.
that.
So the essence of it is, do your karma and don't worry about the fruit. So if you want to understand all of Bhagavad Gita, You can understand it in as easily or as complexly as you want. So essentially, nirvana, if you were to write it as an algorithm, it's Atman plus dharma plus karma. Atman is yourself. Your dharma is to unfold yourself completely in the most truest fashion. And karma is how I show up to get that job done. And this relationship is very symbiotic with the universe as a whole. So the greatest service that you can do to the universe is unfold completely to that which you're meant to be. And don't worry about the fruits, don't worry about the results. You do your thing and it fits into the greater whole. That to me is the underlying message in there. What is that thought right there? You had this look on your face.
Oh no, that was great. The thought on I was actually thinking ahead of the structure of this conversation because I want to get to talking about dance, but I thought that you might start by getting you to say something else about theater. Do you have something?
Which way do you want to go? Throw something at me. It's kind of hard to just jump in.
That's all I'm doing. Um, well, I think okay. This would be one of my takes is that in order to be on the stage, you're not yourself, right?
Yes.
So this is the same as
Yes.
going to war.
Yes.
I was just on the stage the other day dancing. I had to go from low energy. You have to warm up, right? I had to go from low energy to super high energy instantaneously and stay there.
Yes.
You know, for 10 minutes or more.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an adrenalized state, and
Mm-hmm.
I could see the audience close up, and I couldn't see the person next to me. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like, and the rhythm that I'm hearing gets distorted. It gets longer and longer. The spaces get bigger and bigger. Things like that are happening,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you could understand it as so this sort of theater, martial arts, ritual, like warfare, performance, all these things wrapped together into the distant past. And as human technologies have been influencing each other, and I don't think we can say one comes before the other, but there they all are, I think is the way to put it.
Yes, I agree, and everything that you described about dance, I would say it's the same thing with theater. It's the same thing with martial arts, because there's a particular way of getting into that state, right? It's got a syntax. It's got an algorithm, if you will. There's a particular way, and that particular way is very unique to you, right? What works for you to get into that state will not necessarily work for me in that exact way. Um, and we all have access to different energies. Think of them as different websites from which you can download content, right? I mean, I'm trying to bring this idea forth without it being completely lost, right?
Okay, I gotta check my phone. No, all right, go ahead. Sorry.
So it's ways of downloading this particular information and then allowing that information to be displayed on your screen, which is your consciousness, if you will, because that's all it is, right? So in many ways, just the state that you were describing, uh, very recently, a few weeks ago, I was quite sick. I had a bad asthma attack, and yet I had to perform, and I wasn't sure I would be able to do this 3 hours. And I did my thing, went through my ritual, and as I got in, something started to change. And as time went by, I actually started getting better and better. And I don't remember how it started or how it ended. All I remember is at the end, I was completely depleted. But while I was performing, right, and I'm using that word very carefully, while I was performing, I was completely energized. And I would
Yeah.
say that that's the same thing that you want in that state of fighting, where when you access that state of fighting, where where that animal, if you will, for the lack of a better term, comes out and it does what the animal has to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't be thinking. You have to let the animal out. It has to it has to perform, it has to do what it has to do through you, then you come back out. And one of the big markers of this I've noticed is that when you're done, your energy suddenly drops. There's this big drop in energy. And also, for me, I've noticed that I'm able to replay the highlights almost in slow motion. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it kind of get. I think that I would just put this to the bigger subject. And
Okay.
the bigger subject is that rituals take us into states which we might be able to vaguely recognize as having being some kind of hormonal cocktail, but that's really it's still completely inaccessible when you think of it that way. So who cares, right? So for instance, the people who are doing devotional, like intense devotional religious practices, are accessing oxytocin. I mean, at the very least, they're or anyway, you can hate this, but
Yeah.
I would say that my point here is that these technologies they don't frame the world that way, but and they're not technologies, they're dances, they're fighting techniques, they're ways of getting in, but these getting in are deeply valuable to
Yes.
what we are as human beings. They're really deep, important knowledge. And I might, after dancing, just want to talk, like just feel really
Hmm.
energized, right? For a long time. It can take me a really long time to come down. But then the next day, I'm like, my body has a kind of like will of its own to be pumped up, right? Or things like that. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
wide range of phenomena
Yes.
that you can get good at tapping into and even teach.
Yes. Yes. So the way I think about rituals, right? I think of it much more than just the biochemistry inside my brain.
Of
Uh,
course. Yeah.
um, um, I think about it as how my primal form, if you will, right? How my primal form can unfold and be in a relationship with something far greater than itself. And when it's in this relationship or dance with something far greater than itself, uh, something in both itself and that which is greater than itself changes because they feed each other, they nourish each other. So the quality of that ritual, if enacted properly, should deepen with each practice. So it has a method, it has a sequence, and a way of going deeper still. So there's this relationship forming with that deity, be it an animal, be it a monster, or the gods, if you will. So the real question is, what are you feeding, and what are you invoking and bringing through into the world, and what is it that you are feeding with your life force into that other world? That's how I see rituals.
Does the word potency come up here?
Of course it does. And yes.
So you can think. So one of the common metaphors in Chinese ritual is the idea that you are at the point, a spiritual pivot. In fact, there's a medical book called this, the Ling Shu. It's like you're in. There's a place in time, a time space moment which you inhabit, which is a pivot into the past and the future, and spatially into the emptiness of things and the realness of things, that gives you an experience of limitless potency, and that you're only doing some limited thing. So it's not like make the oceans dry up in real time or something, but there is an experience of the limitlessness of your influence and the influence of things on you, and that's that pivot from which ritual takes place.
Absence of time. Yes.
Yeah, in fact, there's a name for it, xiantian, in Chinese. It means outside of time or
Yeah.
atemporality. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Nothing to add to that. I agree.
So it's pretty neat. Anyway, it's pretty neat that we're having this conversation. I'm going to bring it to dance. I'm going to just do a bunch of things and just jump in
Sure.
and out. So one of the first things I asked you, I think, was like, "Hey, if you read the Natya Shastra, which is the Shastra of dance, which comes later than the other Shastras, but I happen to have a copy, and it's like, whoa, it's like we don't know the dates really, maybe third, fifth century something CE, but obviously based on something earlier. Um, there's some very cool parts in it, like one where it's like the sanctification of the stage
Mm-hmm.
involves people getting really rowdy, and if somebody breaks a leg, that's really a good omen.
Good omen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just like love that. So I talk about one of the themes that the second part of my book is on Bagwajang, and that's the god Neja riding wind fire wheels, which are also karma wheels, and his body made of a lotus flower, suggesting that it's infinite. Um, and somebody pointed out it looks like he's blowing glass there, but I think that's a spear. Um, the uh, and that's a puppet, of course, right? So it's an empty body controlled from the outside. Um, and this Naja character is in fact traceable to Krishna, not exclusively, but particularly his creation story. Naja's creation story is the creation story for Krishna, or one of the creation stories for Krishna. And maybe I'm going too far out here. I'll be more specific. But in Kathak, so Kathak is this dance style that I studied, and I can even show a little right now. But just to make it more lively. But Kathak, another name for Kathak is Nattawari Nritya, which means the dance of Lord Krishna. And the origin story of the dance is that Krishna dives into the ocean, or not, sorry, he dives into the river. He's playing with a ball with his friend. He dives into the river Yamuna, and he fights a Naga, the king of the Nagas, uh, and which is basically dragon. And the way it's translated into Chinese, that name Naga gets translated as dragon into Chinese, or Lung. And he fights and comes out. He fights the dragon playfully, right, as a child, playing, teasing, in fact, torturing to some extent this Naga, and comes out dancing on its head, and it makes the sounds ta te 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 ah te te ta, which is the dance, is the basic dance moves, which I think I could show here. No, maybe not. Let's see if I can get the angle on the camera. No, I can't. Anyway, uh, I'll show that in another video, but people can search for Kathak and see it. But this dance, right, is then that same story is basically told as an origin story for the god Naja. And it's a slightly different story. He fights several dragon princes. They elaborate on it, and then he sacrifices himself by cutting off his flesh, and giving his flesh to his mother and his bones to his father. And the story is not the same, but he's a child, and he has many of these attributes. And it's my assumption that India story went to, we know it went to China. We can find it in China, right? And got transformed into this Naja story, which is Naja is the patron saint of Beijing, and he's the greatest fighter in all of China. He's like the greatest human fighter, the Monkey King, which also comes from India, probably.
Hanuman. Yeah.
Is a better fighter, but he's not a human. So Naja is the greatest fighter, and in his invincibility, and there are all these rituals around it. And what I argue is that this dance Kathak is very closely related to Bagwajang, and that they have all these things in common, and that they maybe they're separated by 500 years. We don't know, but the fact that they both are closely connected to what is essentially the same God, to me, was just a profound revelation. So, do you have any comments? Yeah, on that.
Yeah, much like you and I had discussed while we were in LA, I am not, I am not uh, fully sold on the idea, right? And it just might be because of my lack of understanding of some of the intricacies of Kathak. So I'm open to that possibility, right? But I can see that. But we should also keep in mind that the Krishna story, and I'm talking about the mythic form, right? I want to be very careful how I frame this. The mythic form of the Krishna story is found all around the world. You have that very similar story in Persia and going all the way back to Egypt. So, as an Indian, I'd love to say this came from India, but my point here is that I think this is a mythic form that exists across time and space. And I think different cultures have tapped into it. Now, here's the thing, right? If we are tapping into a particular source of information, the expressions that come out of it will be somewhat similar. The geography may change it a little bit. So, for example, one of my examples, the way I think about it, is that you have a particular plant seed. Let's just say a mango seed, right? The way the mango seed grows in South India will be a little different than the way it might grow, say, in Philippines or Latin America or anywhere else. But it's in its expression, it's the same thing. But the forces that act upon it change it.
Okay, so that's an analogy, but let me actually press you on that. What you are actually suggesting here is that is like that there is a physical archetypal unconscious. So that this is Jungian psychology here to be made it into the 20th century through Jung, at least in English, is this idea that there is a collective unconscious and
Yes,
that it manifests all over the place slightly differently, but it's something innate about human beings because we actually evolved it, and that myths themselves are an evolutionary force, and the human
correct.
consciousness is an evolved thing. He says that on the first page of his
Yeah,
book.
I'll go a little further and say consciousness is evolved, not just human consciousness.
Yeah, that's good. And so right, because it predates humans if we're thinking in terms of evolution. Um, but that so that physical movement itself is also inseparable from the collective unconscious.
Absolutely. And, tying back to how we started this conversation, right? If you truly want to study, a culture, it's not what is said or what my eyes see, right? Because my eyes are trained to see certain things and maybe completely oblivious to the others. Just imagine your first trip to India. What was that like? Or my first trip to the US was like, holy crap, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
Right? So the perception was not shaped as such, right? However, I think this is where some of the things that we do with immersion labs, I think is amazing, is because what we're trying to do is a couple of different things. One, bring multidisciplinary teams. We have anthropologists, filmmakers, musicians, martial artists coming together and going on these expeditions, right? Now, what we're really trying to grok is how they move,
Mm.
because when you grok how they move, and many a times when you don't understand their language, or there's somebody else translating it, and you tell them, okay, forget it. I just want to move and have him move me the way he's moving. You start accessing the same things because if you look at the work that Paul Ekman did around the world, that human emotions show up exactly the same regardless of what culture you are in. So in some ways, human movement is in some ways something pre-conscious that ties us all together. So to truly grok a particular culture, a particular way of fighting, you grok into that first. Second, you start learning about their cosmologies, right? What are their creation stories, right? How do they bring about harmony in their world? What is the pedagogy of becoming a mature adult within that society, right? And what is one's role in relationship to society. When we start looking at movement and looking at all of this together, you start having a very rich understanding of it. Now, there's one thing I would say that unites all humanity, right? And that's violence. So why not study it deeply in order to truly understand the state of humanity? I wish I could take credit for that, but I think it was Sir Burton Francis who said that, hey, the study of man is the study of violence, the study of the sword.
Mm. Well, that was great summary. For people watching, I just wanted to bring up this book. It's called Dancing for Themselves, which is about India. It's by Mohan Kohar. I don't know how you say that.
Kokar.
And it's actually, it's called Folk, Tribal, and Ritual Dance of India, and it's got a lot of descriptions and stuff which are pretty cool. I mean, it is kind of an overview of Indian cultures. But if you flip through this, and it's a little hard to do on the video, maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do that on a separate video and connect it. But there's tons of fighting stuff. There's tons of armor stuff, dance stuff, and really when you look at it through dance, India is 100, maybe 300 different cultures. That
more,
that have some uniqueness. I mean, like, look at this wildness.
Yeah.
And so here's a bunch of stuff here. One of the things, there's tons and tons of war dances and dances about violence and dueling dances and all of these things. And the bells on the ankles, I'm just talking about this material, but I do want to go to the universal. The bells on the ankles, are like, there's actually lots of different things people put on their ankles when they dance, because that Achilles tendon, man, you cut that and you've dropped somebody out of the fight. And so these bells are like, they're little bronze facets for catching blades, and also in the Mahabharata, there's a whole section where it talks about the noise of warfare.
Correct.
Right. They were actually there. If you have enough people with bells, it's scary.
Not just that, if the blade hits your Achilles tendon, the bells make a sound and it wakes you up.
Oh yeah. Wow, that's cool. So yeah, and so that whole dancing thing, and so I studied Kathak, right? Go ahead. You want to say something?
Go ahead.
So I studied Kathak from a man, who had a lot of bravado and who understood the tradition as a duel between the dancer and the drummer, a symbolic duel, a fight, as it were. And man, those concerts, those intimate concerts where they were doing that, were incredible. There isn't one on YouTube at this moment. I don't know why, whatever, but those concerts where I was sitting right there going, they're killing each other spiritually, like, it was awesome. And the physicality, like, if you haven't done a bunch of fighting or studied fighting, it's very hard to see. And in fact, a lot of people who claim to be fighters don't see it at all. But Kathak is continuous drop steps. And when you do fast drop steps like that, you've mobilized 170 pounds or whatever you weigh, in every touch you make. And there are constant elbow strikes and chops and even symbolically cutting your own head off, stuff going on, and manipulation of weapons, even if the weapon isn't there, but it's a display of the manipulation. The way you engage the back, it's hugely martial. The spinning, the consciousness or awareness of space that you create from constant spinning is there. So I just knew this because I've been doing this stuff, but I had a great conversation with a woman who has yet to publish, and we'll see if I can do an interview with her. But she was explaining that, so that the Kathak, there are two Kathak schools, one from Lucknow, which was the Muslim court, and the other from Jaipur, which was the Rajput court, and these were the warrior shastrias as well, and they were servants of the court. These people that were called katakas, or storytellers. Kata means to tell stories. The kataka is a storyteller.
Katha is story, yeah.
And katak is the name of the dance, right? And so they were a kind of class, right, which according to her would lead. They were almost like a sacrificial warrior. They would lead the armies into battle, dancing and drumming. They would wrap the drums around their waist and dance and drum, leading the battles in. So that I guess they were more likely to die because they were in front, but that was like their role in this, and I was just like, whoa, okay, now that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things come to mind here, right? So the first thing is, for example, like Rajputs, right? I'm from Rajasthan. So one of the things with Rajputs is that you go into war like you're going to go meet your newlywed bride. That's the spirit you enter into
Right.
war with. So your death is your bride, right?
Yeah.
That's how it takes you into a very different state, like I said, right? Also,
Mm-hmm.
remember we spoke earlier where your marriage is seen as a death ceremony. You flip the whole code on its head, right? And you're entering into war like, oh, I'm going to go meet my bride. In the recent history, right, where you had these great revolutionaries in India, Bhagat Singh and Chandrasekhar Azad. They went and bombed the parliament, the British Parliament, and then in India, and then they were sentenced to death. So they were asked, okay, what's your last wish? He says, oh, let me go kiss my gallows. Let me kiss my bride before I die. So
Yeah.
that's the, that's the mindset. And so you cannot divorce the two, right? And secondly, if you look at cultures where they were conquered by somebody else, one of the first things that they would do is ban the fighting. So how are you going to disguise the fighting? You're going to make it a dance form, right? We see a lot of that, especially with the African slaves coming into the Caribbean and Latin America, but that is true everywhere in the world. So you really cannot separate those two: the celebration, the dancing, and blood. Go ahead and dance.
We should give a plug for the Siobi, uh,
TJ.
TJ Obi's wonderful book on fighting for honor there, which I mean, if you haven't read it and you're interested in martial arts, I don't know how you can put those two things together. You better go read it.
Read it.
Great.
And he's a great, great, great guy. Proud to call him as one of my collaborators on our expeditions. And so all-round awesome guy to work with. And if you ever have a chance and ever want to get to understand anything African or Latin American or the art of Grima, go look him up in New York. He's a invisible man, but if you can find him, it's worth it.
I think he's in Venezuela right now.
He's gotten back to
oh, he's back
to New York. Yeah.
Oh, cool. What was I going to say about the dance? I thought it was great. We brought in the healing ritual thing too. I mean, you described your own healing experience. I think that is just one of the most, poorly understood in within modernity, right? That ritual and healing are linked.
Yeah, I mean, one of the primal ways of healing is going on to the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Jungian, you could call it shadow work, right? I don't like that term, but essentially that which is hidden, right?
Because everything is shadow work.
Yes, yes, that's a different story. But where I was going to with this is you are living in the ordinary world, which is this world of consensual reality. And what rituals do is let you go into the non-ordinary world, which is equally real, and it gives you permission, ability, and access to go there. And why this is important is because there is this relationship between the conscious and the unconscious world. And in many ways, your dreams, your premonitions, sometimes your body spontaneously moving. If you've done martial arts for a long time, you or dancing, you'll know what I'm talking about, where a move spontaneously emerges, unfolds in a glip-like fashion. Right? That particular thing is nothing short of a postcard from the unconscious, an invitation to say, "Hey, here's the invitation, RSVP, and come on in." Right? So when I think about healing, it's essentially that particular process of becoming ever more whole.
Yeah, that's
Because
great. Yeah, and so so improvisational theater, right, is like facing your fear so that you can overcome your fear, and like releasing fear from the body so that you have access to your unconscious. Right. That is practically the definition in my mind of improvisational theater. That's what you're practicing. It's not that you need to be able to improvise to go on the stage. It's that in order to access the fearless body, you have to have experienced your unconscious and
yeah,
trusted it.
yeah, I think the word fear is loaded in my mind. The way I think about it is going towards the polarity, that which you're comfortable with, and that you're not things not yet comfortable with. Right? Giving yourself permission to go there and make uh, make a friend out of this unknown and bring a piece of that back into this. So in some ways, it's kind of going in there, finding a part of yourself and bringing it ever so carefully back into this world.
Yes, you can find it. There's almost a division in the body politic between people who are doing fear avoidance and people who are like fear as a tool
Yeah,
or an act or a window, right?
yeah,
Door.
but you start thinking in terms of polarity. It just opens up a whole world, because fear you have to almost discover by accident.
Yeah.
But when you start exploring polarities, light and dark, happy and sad, whatever it is, you suddenly start to figure the pull and push. And when you start working with the pull and push together, guess what you do? You create a propulsion system. Boom, ready to
Right.
fly.
Right. Good. Um, yeah, strong stuff. Um, dream. You brought up dream there.
Yeah.
Dream practice. So there's a practice, a Taoist practice called day and night the same.
Hmm.
And so you can think of the golden elixir practice, um, or even like a visceral description of enlightenment is that you are experiencing the outer edge of emptiness. So you're being, we're having a conversation and I'm simultaneously experiencing the outer edge of emptiness. And I'm, I I move that way. When I move that way, it actually remakes my body. It's like almost like a continuous sacrifice in the way we were talking about it before.
Hmm.
It's a continuous remaking of the body, and in a wholeness, just as you said before, it creates a new kind of wholeness. Or, in fact, the word integrity also means
Hmm.
this,
Yes.
and that when in the dream practice, that reverses. It all goes in,
Hmm.
but what it goes into is infinity. It goes into, and so for instance, there's a good book on Tibetan dream practice where they describe, visualize your own heart and visualize a word in it, and inside the word is the entire cosmos, and inside there you see yourself, and then you see your heart, and then you see the character, and you go
Yes.
deeper and deeper, and even this, and this is how you access this this experience of day and night being the same. Which, yeah, go ahead.
Yes. I mean, I uh, studied dreams, but not from an Indian context. So I wish I could add something from a corollary Indian context, but I can't. But I do know that there are entire tantras around it. There is entire yoga nidra, which essentially deals with that state of being awake within the dream and it becoming a ritual practice by itself. That it's way outside my pay grade, man.
I can recommend people who are listening Tibetan Yoga Principles and Practices by Ian Baker. It's not exactly about that, but it's an incredible overview and pictorial. People are interested in going deeper. That just came out. It's fantastic.
But on a different, if I may just bring the dreams a little closer, right?
Yeah.
In many ways, it's a way to, in my mind, access that state of integrity, and it shows how to unfold towards that integrity, and that's why the way I think about them as postcards from the unconscious, right? So, yeah.
Your analogies are cute, but I don't know if I'm going to go with the postcard image. But
you got to find your own way, man. Don't buy mine, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that works for me. And again, English is a really poor language. It sucks, and it's my fourth language. so bear with me.
Yes, of course.
So the way I think about it is this intimation, and that's what it is. It's this intimation, this postcard that says, come in and explore this particular path. And the interesting thing about dreams is when these themes and these images emerge, and you start to physically enact them, actually physically enact them, that becomes the ritual to tap into that deeper state. This is where I was going, and this is why I see that much more as a postcard, because what happens is it gives you these snapshots where you have different dreams, and when you start linking them with movement, right, it suddenly becomes a kata, if you will.
So, to interrupt you, Tai Chi, one of the things I proved in my book that had been, all these scholars were just in absolute denial and I would call it visceral denial of the connection between Tai Chi and Zhen Feng. And I proved that Tai Chi actually comes from a play in the 1590s. And it's quite theatrical, and that the god, or the immortal, Zhen Feng, is a practitioner of the golden elixir and dream. And everybody knew that. And that's how he was understood. And in fact, Tai Chi is quite obviously, from what you just said and from having done this practice, it's quite obviously a dream practice. It's dreams made manifest. It's a way of accessing the way we move in our dreams and taking that knowledge into living, into waking.
I'm going to have to think about that. But yeah, but it sounds pretty damn analogous to what I was describing.
Well, that's pretty neat. And so would you go anywhere with narrative? I mean, the Mahabharata obviously is this massive collection. And I believe you studied it as a child in great depth.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to be really Indian and not study Mahabharata. That would not be possible.
Good. Is that the definition of Indian by any chance?
I think the way I think about it is all of Indian spirituality and ethics is contained in that one text. Because the spirituality can be condensed in the Bhagavad Gita, if you will, right? But the rest of the Mahabharata, which spans many generations, is the fight between good and bad, and the choice between good and good and bad, and what the implications of making those choices are when you look across 5 to 7 generations.
Can we talk about narrative and the body itself? I mean, these were danced, right? These were sung and they were danced.
They were sung for sure and enacted as dances too, yes.
Can we, is there, I'm trying to do something here. Can we link the the human ubiquity of narrative, of storytelling, to the body, to this conversation about the collective unconscious. Can we make a tighter link?
To me, they're one. I mean,
Okay.
no, to me they're one. I don't even know what to say, because like I said, when you move in a particular way, you tap into a story. In some ways, you're tapping into a cosmic story. And to me, cosmic is anything that is outside of your limited ego, right? So when you're moving and inspired either inspired or forced to move in a different way, you're learning a damn new narrative, and it changes you. When you change the way you move, you change the parts of the brain you access. When you change the parts of the brain you access, you change the states you access. When you change the states you access, you change what you learn. So, you know, it's one. To me, change your movement, and you've essentially changed the narrative and the story.
That was brilliant, by the way. And I think both of us are brilliant in the sense that in the sense that we're actually doing really important work. Whether or not outsiders actually get how important this work is, I don't know. Whatever. But it's to me it's like this. I've been calling I coined the term. Actually, my wife coined the term somatic history, to try and tap into the sort of conversation about like how some an element of knowing, the one you just described, that requires you to invest yourself. Um,
What else would you invest? Seriously, there's nothing else you can invest.
well, well, then I can make the distinction between the tragic view and the comic view, right? The tragic view is where you don't change, you experience, 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 and you don't change. Your face stays the same. And if you've ever watched The Good Wife, she's a tragic figure. Just like all this bad stuff happens, she's like like face, whatever her face is, she's got the tragic face, right? Whereas the comic experience is you let it change you a lot, even more than it needs to, right? That's the comic view of history. The comic view of the comic theater is where the character gets changed so much that everyone bursts out laughing and swallows a demon, with their mouth, and it's an exorcism for everyone. It's it's bathing in change, as it were. Um,
Well, that
I
was the original purpose of theater anyway, was to enable when theater was enacted, it was to enable those who watch to become active participants and actually access those states and those emotions and those stories through them. Because there's a process called deep trance identification, right? So you're watching a movie and you identify with a particular character, you identify with a particular superhero or villain. So what you're really doing is you're accessing into them and experiencing the story through them. So when you're watching theater, you are partaking in a ritual. When you're watching movies, you are partaking in a ritual. So careful what you watch and careful what you partake in.
It's really funny. When I first started getting really deep into meditation, I'm doing 2 hours a day, whatever.
Yeah.
I suddenly developed, and I was pretty retreated from life. I was still working, but I was like saying no to everybody. I suddenly developed this appetite for horror movies. I was just like, man, these things are so great. They just get at what we are. You just anyway. It's just an aside, but
Balance, man.
yeah,
Balance.
yeah. That was
Hey,
pretty
there's
great.
there's one thought talking about balance.
Yeah.
Again, we'll tie back to something we started earlier. Now, with India, you hear about Hinduism, where there's this. It's hard to translate into English, but there's this attitude of chalta hai. Chalta hai means it goes. Whatever it
Mm.
is, it's fine. We'll absorb everything. It's very easygoing. Uh, I pissed off a god, I'm going to appease a god, and we're good. It's all good, so to speak.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that's one. I think in some ways it's like the Hakuna Matata, so to speak. You just flow with whatever is. And on the other end is Jainism, which is a very stoic, a very warrior-like approach, where to your self growth, and ultimately breaking free of the chains of bondage of karma. And then Buddhism came along, which hence was called the middle way between these two extremes. Where Hinduism was very lax, anything goes. Jainism was nope, I'm going to utilize everything towards my personal growth. And then Buddhism, hence called the middle way, balancing these two extremes.
Oh man, that we need to talk. We need to schedule another hour or two for that one because I, we could dive deep into that one. And I think that we shouldn't make this too long because
Sure.
we should get people to listen to it. But I actually wanted to say something about this. What we're obviously agreeing on is the important project of the era. Um, so I've been doing Ghanaian dance, not for very long. I studied Haitian dance in my 20s a lot with Catherine Dunham stuff, who was attempting to create a technique to transmit, as a tool for learning African diaspora dances, which is just great that I learned that in my youth because it's still in me. And I studied a lot of Congolese dance with Malunga Kaskulord, and well, the word Kaskulord actually means iron hat. He was a his father was an officer in the military, and so he traveled all over the Congo learning from soldiers, and he had this amazing solid body, um, and yeah, spectacular dancer, and well, that had a huge influence on me, right? But but part of this project is the articulation something. So I've been doing Ghanaian dance mostly because I wanted to improve my social life here in Boulder, where I live, and I so I just meet more people. So I started doing it, and I started to articulate what's going on because these dances, even though they're similar, they're all new. They're not the same dances I learned, and the body moves differently, right? So I'm getting inside, right, something else that transforms me, right? And one of the things I realized is that like the the gold standard for internal martial arts in the Chinese world is the perfect integration of the body, whole body unity, and which creates all kinds of illusions and magic tricks and power, which are kind of asides to the actual value of integrity, as we've talked about, physical integrity and mind spatial awareness integrity. But these dances take whole body unity as their first step. The drumming is going on, and you're going to get this movement pattern, and you don't get it until your whole body moves as a single unit. It's actually, you can fake it, you can get the rhythm right, maybe, you can get the stepping right, maybe, but until your body locks into to effort, I would call it, it's there's a lot of energy moving, you're sweating, but it's effortless integrity. It's like, oh, this is it. And the drumming is going, and there's no separation between you and the drums, and your body is in a kind of perfect unity, a healing unity, I would even call it. And then the drum changes, and you've got to do another one. Um, and and this is, I mean, it's great because your body is like new body, new body, new body, new body, in a sense, like constantly remaking itself. And uh but I just thought that's just, I hadn't articulated that before, that it actually puts this that traditions of, say, West Africa put whole body integrity as the first thing. So
Yeah, it creates tensegrity, the words that Bucky Fuller used to use,
mm,
tension and integrity together, such that that relationship, that tension and the integrity remains together. If I may add one thing to that, I completely agree with you, but dancing's not my sphere.
mm,
Fighting is, right?
mm,
Um, there are certain processes in which you pretty much can hack into your consciousness, right? To wear another body, to wear another expertise, or wear another culture, or wear another way of moving, and then move your consciousness through that and have that become a part of accessing this new movement. There's a lot of work done in the Soviet Union, a gentleman by the name of Lazanov, and I'm forgetting the second gentleman's name. But if you Google things like borrowed genius, it lays out the process starting with autogenics and how to tap into these different rhythms and get a feel for it inside out. Because it's one thing to try and get the movement from outside and then go in, but there's another way as well. Remember polarity, right? Which is go in, go from the inside and come out. And what has worked best for me is when I marry these two together in terms of tapping in and learning a new way of telling a very specific somatic story.
Yeah, this seems endless, but that ties, of course, to a theory that I've presented. I've written some blog posts on it on pedagogy, right? Like that, the West has this idea of progressive pedagogy. You know, you learn this, and then this, and then this, and this. And in fact, Rory Miller was pointed out in interesting conversations that like that might be useful for the teacher, and it might work for simple subjects. But for something like fighting, it's always everything at
Whole
once,
form.
you
Yes,
know?
it's whole form. Yes.
Right? And so, like one of the interesting things about, say, Indian dance, or in tabla, it's really clear when I studied, Indian drumming, is they don't give you like a bunch of basic exercises. They're like, play this, okay? This is what I play in concert. My teacher is like one of the best in the world, right? It's like, this is what I play in concert. Here, you learn it. I'm like, maybe that's the absolute beginners, but someone's in their first year starts doing that and you learn it. And it's just it's like, it's 20 minutes of continuous high-speed compositions that are interrelated so you can sort of remember them, but probably the greatest memorization process I've ever done, right? Just to remember this. You can make notes, but you can't read your notes fast enough to do the changes, right? You have to memorize it. And it sounded terrible for years, because it's the most advanced thing. I couldn't actually play it. But when you can play it, then it's like, wow, this is so many pieces fitting together. There's so much in here. So that approach of give you everything at once and then you sort it out is a completely different tradition. And I would even add to that, because I wrote about this a lot, the last chapter of my book, is the reversal. So you learn something, learn it, and then you do the exact opposite. There are tons of this stuff in martial arts, and I've made a list now of maybe 30 different things that are like that. One of the coolest ones is all these martial arts teach like to sort of tuck the hips a little bit, like because they want you to get through the bones connection for structure. But when you're really lively, it's the opposite. Like the hips go up and over, like a tiger pouncing. But nobody teaches the second one. In the Chinese tradition, nobody teaches the second one. You have to just reverse everything you were taught. You have to have the willpower, to defy your teachers and just reverse everything.
Cool.
Yeah. Man, this is so good. I really think we did. I mean, people listening to this are going, "Wow, he really thinks he's great." But
I had a fun time.
Yeah. Thank you. Anything you want to say on the way out?
If I may just make a small plug for what we are doing.
Yeah.
So follow Immersion Labs. We are essentially going out there trying to find traditions that are on the verge of being lost, because in many ways, when that particular way of violence is gone, a part of the human narrative, a part of the human story, and a part of our consciousness is gone forever. So, these are the things that we're trying to archive, and these are the things we're trying to study and somehow bring back into the world in some way. So, if you're aware of any traditions out there that are on the verge of extinction, or nobody has ever heard of them, you have at least one guy who will pay very, very close attention.
Yeah. Well, no, at least two.
Yeah, at least
Oh.
two. Yeah.
All right. Let's call it a wrap. And thank you.
No, pleasure. Take care.